Hey everyone and welcome. If there's one thing I can do is teaching graduate students and professionals how to be productive, work hard, and enjoy it. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you today. How to make hard work addictive, covering how your mind already finds hard work addictive and that you just have to tune it right, how to literally choose what your mind finds pleasurable or addictive right now, which is hard work in our case, and how to make that pleasure of hard work a deep personality trait, not just a superficial process. And finally, how to amplify that pleasure to make hard work as addictive as Instagram Reels and not just pleasurable. So let's get into it. Starting with, your mind already finds hard work addictive. You just have to tune it right. And if you do so, procrastination, burnouts, and inconsistency would no longer be problems. Your life would simply be a meaningful and a pleasurable pursuit of your goals. But firstly, we need to understand that this is how your mind is naturally wired to be addicted to progress. Biologically, the reward center serves to reward a caveman when he finds food, resources, or bonds with a partner, all of which are forms of progress biologically, right? Although you're not a caveman, you've already felt that before, but you never realized that this is how you've been all along. The validation you got from your friends back in middle school when you showed them a cool skill trick. The happiness you felt after your parents told you they were proud of you for getting good grades you spent tons of hours studying for. The pride you felt after answering a question nobody else in the class could answer, or even saying out a funny joke. All of these are perceived by your brain as markers of progress. I did something good exceptional, it felt nice, do more of that. That's the nature of how you write. You seek progress endlessly, so much so that it's actually hard to turn off. That's why the rich only want to get richer, and the powerful only want more power. I've mentioned in my previous video that the human emotional system, including the reward center, has only one goal: provide signals of how well you're progressing towards your goals. Positive or big progress will lead to positive emotion, and negative or zero progress will lead to negative emotions. I can actually make an argument that progression towards personal goals is the only thing that includes positive emotion, but more about that in a minute. But Doji, I don't really think so. I genuinely hate studying for hours or doing boring tasks, although I know it will help me with my career in life. And I love video games, which are a pure waste of time. How in hell would I have such preferences if my brain was naturally obsessed with progress or hard work? My brother, our obsession with video games is literally evidence that our brain is addicted to progress. That is exactly what games provide: progression towards your goals. There are levels, trophies, collectibles, ranks, challenging difficulties. There are coins to buy new equipment and become stronger, right? There are loot boxes in which you're eager to know what kind of items you'll gain. There are new seasons with new items so that there's always progress to make. Your mind would gladly work hard for 12 hours to make progress it finds worthy, aka gaming. Video games are the biggest piece of proof your mind is addicted to raw progress. Video game studios are exploiting your love for progress by giving you virtual progress. It is progress in a virtual world, but your primitive mind isn't able to distinguish that from real progress, so it feels as good. Could you imagine a video game in which you just walk around aimlessly in a desert, like no objectives, no levels, no progression, just walking around with your character? That would be the most boring thing ever because it doesn't address your love for challenging progression. On the other hand, a genre of very appealing games is one where you can make exponential progress. Examples of such games in which you can make exponential progress are the ones for which you see ads everywhere. They're so annoying as well. There are blocks or squares that multiply your soldier count or building count or whatever. Not just increase it, it multiplies it, right? Making it much more appealing. In addition, the ad shows intently terrible gameplay in which the player misses obvious opportunities so that you're provoked to download the game and achieve that progress you missed. It's so annoying. Okay, Doji, but I still hate boring tasks that I know will help me make progress in my life. And what about TikTok, social media, YouTube, Netflix? These are definitely not progress. I find them much more pleasurable than working on my goals. My brother, I already told you, I can confidently say that if anything feels pleasurable, then your mind perceives it as progress in some form or another, including these things which we'll address in detail at the end, as well as how to deal with them. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. Dopamine is the molecule of progress, which your brain finds pleasurable, hence the misunderstanding that dopamine is the molecule of happiness. More on that at the end. As for why you don't find the hard work you need to be doing enjoyable, this is now what we'll get to. In step 2, how to choose what your mind finds pleasurable or addictive. What if I told you that you can literally fire dopamine in your brain on command? I know it seems weird, but you can actually direct your emotional state, consciously modulating your neurochemistry by generating the thoughts that lead to whatever state you desire. This is where things get really interesting, so listen closely. In his book Behave, neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky mentions a beautiful example of that. When you're watching a movie and get too sucked into its events, you can generally feel sad for the death of a favorite character or even a dog, right? In that moment, if you reminded yourself that, hey, wait a minute, this is a movie with a cast and cameras. That didn't actually happen. That's just acting, and the person didn't actually die. On a neurological level, what happens is your prefrontal cortex, which is the rational part of your brain, communicates with your limbic system or the emotional part of your brain, telling it, hey, this is just acting, calm down. What this does is it literally suppresses the emotions of sorrow using a thought. You rationally and consciously modulated your emotional state using a thought. Okay, Doji, what does that have to do with hard work and finding pleasure in it? Well, you can do the same with hard work. You can send your brain thoughts of, hey, this is progress, while doing whatever hard work, and it'll respond by generating a positive emotional response, specifically releasing dopamine in the reward circuitry. Eventually, that hard work will be perceived as a process of progression and will be associated with pleasure by default. Okay, how? Just say, this is progress and my brain will feel that pleasure? Yes, exactly. And if you think it's weird, you already do it, but subconsciously and in a terribly wrong way. Let me explain. When you finish a heavy project you've struggled so much with, or do a great killer workout, or study for exceptionally long and pick back up on your curriculum, you feel good. You feel pleasurable and achieved, right? Where the do you think that sensation of pleasure comes from? It's because you subjectively perceive that outcome as progress, and therefore that resonated within your mind as a dopamine signal. If you choose to perceive something as progress with conviction, your mind won't have a choice but to find it pleasurable, and this is how you can choose what you find pleasure in. The problem, however, is that you only do that after finishing something. You've been associating the finishing of tasks as the trigger for progress and therefore pleasure. That's why you only felt pleasure after the task, but terrible throughout. This might seem a bit hard to grasp, so stay with me. You've been conditioning yourself for years or decades even to exclusively find progress in the outcome and never in the process. That's why your brain hates hard work itself and only loves its outcome. So you already do that associative conditioning, but you've just been doing it wrong. Most people attach subjective reward on the outcome, obsessively fixating over having finished as the marker of progress, making the work itself feel like torture, which paradoxically leads them to procrastinate and never get to finish, let alone start. This subtle shift makes all the difference. Your brain never rewarded you for hard work because you never told your brain its progress. You never gave it any signal. The solution is quite simple though. You shift your lens from perceiving the outcome as the progress to the work itself. And you don't do that by spontaneously saying, I'm making progress every 5 seconds as you're working. That wouldn't be maintainable, right? You'll simply associate progression with triggers that are almost always a true marker of progress and are always present in hard work. Pain, friction, and micro-progression. First off, pain and friction while working are the emotional feedback that you're advancing, that you're progressing, because any growth is always effortful. Secondly, micro-progression is the most raw, authentic form of progression. It is the one page you get through while reading, the one question you solve while revising, the one section you finish while writing. Just like atoms make up all matter and are the only component of the universe, micro-progression is the only real fundamental constituent of progress. When you consciously attach your subjective perception of progression to those triggers, which are pain, friction, and micro-progression, you'll be rewarded throughout the process, just like I am being right now while writing the script, or when I was writing the script, because currently I'm recording, obviously. Soon enough, through what's known as associative conditioning, which is what was used to train Pavlov's dogs, if you're familiar with that, your brain will conceive that pain, friction, and hard work as a sign you're making progress, making that friction itself a source of dopamine and pleasure, in addition to the micro-progression, which is the most concrete evidence progress is being made. I want you to watch this clip of Andrew Huberman talking about this.
You have to tell yourself, okay, this effort is great. This effort is pleasureful. What you find over time is that you can evoke dopamine release from the friction and the challenge that you happen to be in. The beauty of this mesolimbic reward pathway is that it includes the forebrain. So you can tell yourself the effort part is the good part. I know it's painful. I know this doesn't feel good, but I'm focused on this. I'm going to start to access the reward. You will find the rewards, meaning the dopamine release inside of effort if you repeat this over and over again. And what's beautiful about it is that it starts to become reflexive for all types of effort. When we focus only on the trophy, only on the grade, only on the win as the reward, you undermine that entire process.
So as you can see, with that simple cognitive shift, you've changed your pattern from finishing a task leading to sensation of progress and therefore dopamine or pleasure to this pattern in which you work on a task, leading to pain, friction, and microprogression. And these triggers create the sensation of progress and therefore the release of dopamine and the sensation of pleasure. So this is an image that hopefully illustrates the process more clearly. So what most people do is this, right? They attach one big dopamine reward to finishing. So it makes the process itself feel like torture. It's painful because, again, you're only looking for that outcome, right? So you despise the process eventually, making you procrastinate and avoid initiating to start with. But what we want to do alternatively is this. We want to distribute the cues or triggers of progression throughout the process itself instead of attaching the reward just to the outcome or the finishing of the task. So these glowy circles here represent mini progression, pain, and friction, respectively. And as you can see, as long as you have these triggers spread out and distributed throughout the process itself feels pleasurable. It feels like you're making progress real time as you're doing the thing instead of just waiting for that one pleasure sensation of having finished the task, right? So it provides a stream of dopamine, motivation, and reward sensation throughout the process, making it very seamless and smooth. I hope that communicates the point clearly. Exploit the fact that your brain's reward circuitry is subjective and consciously controllable. In short, attach your reward sensation to the pain, friction, and microprogressions of working on the challenge task. And secondly, detach the reward sensation from the outcome or having finished the task or setting session or workout or whatever. Just like in the previous lecture, it's about utilizing the powerful psychological driver of subjective value perception. Isn't that absolutely beautiful? You love to see it. So you might say, is that trick on its own going to flip my life around and turn me to a productivity guru all of a sudden? Well, the answer is no. It is a powerful technique on a micro or small scale during the process itself, but we want macro or large scale change on a deep level. So let's proceed to how to make the pleasure of hard work a deep personality trait, not just a process. Because again, what we just discussed was on the small scale of the process itself, but what if you could make that a personality trait? An identity so deep within that your entire life revolves around working hard towards your goals, hopefully achieving them, with a deep, powerful work ethic. You see, such a deep shift would reflect immensely on your life and goals like no other. You can become not only someone that loves hard work and goal pursuit, stacking achievement after another, you can make that your only comfort, essentially finding genuine discomfort in not working hard. That could seem unachievable, but trust me, it's not. Examples are, we know at least one person in our lives who studies or works all day and only finds comfort doing that. It's almost as if studying or working is their leisure and fun, the same way TikTok and Instagram are for the rest of us, the leisure and fun. Or a person who despises skipping a workout and does everything they possibly can to not miss it. Those kinds of people find it hard to not work hard, if that makes any sense. The work ethic is engraved so deep within them that stepping back into their old identities of leisure, fun, and doom scrolling is harder than it is for someone used to that leisure to step into the world of hard work. Again, that might be a bit hard to grasp, so let me say that again. The work ethic is engraved so deep within them that stepping back into their old identities of leisure and fun is harder than it is for someone used to that leisure and fun to step into the world of hard work they find comfort in. I hope that makes sense. Put simply, it is literally harder for them to not work hard than it is for a lazy person to do work. I know that for certain because I'm literally one of those people. Thankfully, not to an obsessive extent, but I find so much comfort, pleasure, and meaning in working my brains off and generally feel uncomfortable when I rest for too much or play around knowing that I have insane potential that I'm choosing to not achieve due to my laziness. And I'm not saying this to brag, I just want to let you know that this transformation is most definitely possible. Now, a wonderful example of that idea is David Goggins. David Goggins genuinely loves the pain of progress because it's a sign that he's growing stronger, that he's growing tougher. Doesn't that sound familiar? The attachment of reward to pain or friction of progress technique we just talked about? To David Goggins, that's not a technique, but a personality trait. He now finds so much value in that pain and friction of growth that it is more painful for him to not experience that pain because that means he's leaving gains on the table. A similar example is Brian Johnson. If you don't know who that is, he's someone obsessed with having perfect health and being immortal, essentially. What I care about is you can almost feel the despise he has for processed, unhealthy, sugary foods from his attitude. He generally hates it. So you might not need much persuasion to eat 3 donuts in one setting, although you kind of know it's unhealthy. But Brian Johnson, there's no way in hell you could persuade him into touching a donut. All of those are examples of people who not only find their hard work easy, but actively find so much resistance and discomfort in not doing it or taking a cheat day or such. You can become that person. It's possible to find only hard work towards your goals fulfilling and pleasurable and nothing else. And that's through changing 2 elements of your psyche. The first is your identity, and the second is your value system. I'll have a separate video on identity later. For now, let's talk about that value system. You see, the common factor among David Goggins, Brian Johnson, and your workaholic or studyaholic or gym rat friend or whatever is that they all have that compass deep within. And the deeper you hold onto a belief, identity, or goal, the more it manifests and reflects onto your life and behavior. For David Goggins, it's not just about being hard for no reason. David Goggins understands that he's a role model. There are phantoms of trauma and abuse he's fighting back, from childhood domestic abuse to insanely challenging obstacles throughout his life. He's tasted the rotting stasis of staying in his comfort zone. He's very conscious of it, and he never wants to go back. If you've read any of his books, you'll be familiar with what I'm saying about it. He's also tasted the delightful growth that comes after the pain of hardship, and he fell in love with it. So much so that you can feel it's become his obsession. That has become his value system, his new lens through which he interprets the world. The pain and friction of growth is the best thing giver, and comfort is a despicable, rotting state.
And I started finding things that was comfortable. And the more things I found comfortable, the more uncomfortable my mind was.
To likewise change your own value system, here's what you have to do. You have to develop very accurate, very deep consciousness about what that endeavor means to you. You have to be so connected to your goal and so connected to why it matters to you that not working towards it feels more painful than working towards it. This is all changed deep down in the roots of consciousness, and you can't magically force it. Please don't think this is some motivational gibberish. It's the cognitive behavioral model we discuss all the time, and it's a proven theory of how humans act. Cognition drives behavior. There are only two tools that allow you to execute such a change of values that would then reflect on your behavior: reflection and writing, or a mix of both, reflective writing. Dan Pink says, writing is an act of discovering what you think and what you believe. Flannery O'Connor says, I write to discover what I know. And as an aspiring neuropsychiatrist, I know the raw, transformative power that deep writing has on your psyche. When coupled with reflection as well, you develop accurate consciousness of your beliefs and why they're there, enabling you to fluidly control them. You have to reflectively write about the whys. Why do you want to achieve that one thing? Why would it pain you to not achieve it? Why would you exert yourself in it? What potential can you bring to the world, to your loved ones, to your circle? What is the world missing with your potential being blocked? What reason is there for that potential to be achieved? Those 6 questions and all what entails, write deeply and vastly, dissect your psyche anatomically until you feel like you can manually shape your cognition from within. This isn't a one-time exercise. It has to be a lifestyle. The depth and volume of the writing you do is what will then dictate the depth and magnitude of the change, of the transformation. If you're so unproductive and lazy that you can't even get yourself to write reflectively, then reflection on its own is enough. Reflect upon every change. Look at your loved ones and ask yourself accurately, without necessarily writing if you don't want to. What more could I give to them if I was richer, stronger, smarter, more capable, more successful, whatever? What blessings are they not having just because I'm choosing to let my potential waste away? It is such deep reflection and writing that will deepen your consciousness of the gap between your current state and your desired state. And when that consciousness is deep enough, you'll find excruciating pain and discomfort in what you previously regarded as leisure or mere procrastination. You'll find comfort, pleasure, and meaning in what you previously regarded as hard work, which will make you question whether it's even hard anymore. So this endeavor of deep reflection and writing is what will allow you to twist around your values so that what was comfortable is now uncomfortable because you're acutely conscious of how it's rotting you and vice versa. A personal example of that is my uncle was actually a chronic smoker up until he was 40 years, right? Anyone trying to quit smoking knows how insanely hard it is to quit. Yet my uncle quit smoking in a day, in an instance, after his father, which is my grandfather, had to perform a pneumectomy in which he had to remove a part of his lungs essentially, and also lost the ability to speak after he had surgery done on his vocal cords as well. He surely passed away after, all due to lung cancer from heavy smoking. Now, my uncle had seen his father pass away, and I can tell that deep in his consciousness of what he's truly doing to himself with that filth called cigarettes. He didn't try a technique. He didn't try to read a book about how to quit smoking. He just developed deeper consciousness of the process without being aware of it even. And all of a sudden, going back to smoking was harder than smoking. I hope that gets my point through. Now let's proceed to how to amplify that pleasure you get from hard work. So it's not just fun, but generally addictive. That should be number 4. My bad, I misnumbered them. So anyway, we now understand the processes of directing your own reward circuitry and consciously choosing what to find pleasurable, both on a process level using the subjective perception technique we talked about, And on the inner deep level, which is what we just discussed, which is the macro scale, right? Making it a deep personality trait by changing your values. Now we can maintain those two habits and develop them while also proceeding to amplifying that pleasure we derive from hard work through a science-based framework. With the right technique, you can make it not just fun, but as addictive as social media, adult content, fast food, or whatever you find most pleasurable. But to understand that technique, we first have to answer two questions. First of all, what aspects make something pleasurable in general so that we can reverse engineer them into our hard work? And secondly, what aspects make these things in specific, the things we just mentioned, social media, fast food, and so on, highly pleasurable to the extent of addictiveness. So we can also reverse engineer that into our hard work. Starting with the first, what makes something pleasurable in general? Eating a chocolate chip cookie is much more pleasurable than eating a boiled egg, right? But picture this, you just ate 5 huge chocolate chip cookies and are stuffed full. Is the 6th one any pleasurable? Probably not. On the other side, picture this, you're stranded in a desert with no food for 5 days and out of nowhere, you're blessed with a boiled egg. It'll feel so pleasurable, almost ecstatic because you were starving. From those two scenarios, we can conclude that what makes something pleasurable isn't necessarily about the intrinsic, objective nature of the thing. Otherwise, the 6th chocolate chip cookie would have been always better than the egg regardless of the circumstances. But that wasn't the case in the example we mentioned. That's because it's also about the state you were in beforehand, your baseline. For example, a spoiled kid is hard to make happy even with the newest, biggest iPad or PlayStation or whatever. Meanwhile, a starving child in Gaza could go crazy over having one full meal or a glass of clean water. Again, it's not about the objective nature or value of the things. The iPad is expensive, more rare, while food and water are everywhere, but it's about the baseline beforehand. This is the concept of emotional relativity. Your emotional state is dictated by the gap between your stimulation baseline and the activity you're engaging with until it becomes the new baseline, of course. This graph illustrates this concept in which, let's say that this is your baseline stimulation level and suddenly you're exposed to a new stimulus, right? The gap between the baseline and the level of the new stimulus is actually your emotional state at any given time. I hope that makes sense. So in our context, which is we want to make hard work enjoyable, we need to address that baseline of stimulation so that the gap between the baseline and the activity of hard work is greater and therefore the emotional state is more pleasurable. I hope that makes sense and I'll tell you exactly how we can do that in a minute. But first, let's answer this second question. What exact aspects make these things in specific, social media, fast food and such, highly pleasurable to the extent of addictiveness that distracts us from doing the work we need to be doing? As I mentioned at the beginning, I can confidently make the argument that anything your brain finds pleasurable is actually because your brain thinks it's progress in some form or another, whether you're aware of it or not. But Doji, I find pleasure in watching YouTube and scrolling in TV shows or series and oily fast foods, although none of these help me make any progress in my life. If anything, it's the opposite. They're usually very harmful and distract me from being productive, and they waste my time and they rid me of my energy. How in hell is that progress? My brother, your brain's primal perception of progress is entirely different from yours. You see, your brain is that of a hunter-gatherer, not a 21st century office employee or college student. The lifestyle we currently enjoy has vastly differed from that of a hunter-gatherer, but the neural wiring is still biologically attuned to the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. That's why your mind's conception of progress is that of a hunter-gatherer still. If you're interested in knowing more about that biological mismatch in particular, you can read Robert Sapolsky's book Behave, which I just mentioned a few minutes ago. So anyway, in that light, fast food is progress because it is very fat dense, which stores up fat in your body in case of a starvation. That's why it's so pleasurable. You wish to make fast food taste bad so that you can easily stick to a healthy diet, but you simply can't. No matter how hard you try to convince your brain that a starvation isn't remotely possible in today's hyper-industrial world, it is still wired for a hunter-gatherer and will never say no to a fat, juicy Big Mac, even if you're literally obese. Because nutritious, fat-packed food isn't just progress in the way it keeps you satiated and gives your body energy stores in the form of fat. It is artificial hyper-progress. More about that in a minute. Likewise, adult content is also progress. It simulates reproduction. Your brain thinks those hot Instagram models are your wives and not women on a screen because hunter-gatherers had no access to screens. Likewise, romance novel addiction for women simulates a virtual romantic experience in which she can pretend like she's living a love story. Obviously, that's not the case. In either case, reproduction is raw progress from a biological perspective, and that's why such content is pleasurable to engage with. Even doom scrolling is progress. The amount of information you're exposed to is very rewarding. It's the same reason gossip often feels fun. You're acquiring information about your surroundings. tribe members, events, drama, whatever. And that's valuable because it helps you navigate your life throughout these circumstances and pieces of information. In the case of doom scrolling, the information is usually irrelevant and you don't need them. But your brain doesn't understand that. It doesn't understand that it's browsing YouTube shorts, ingesting AI slop, or hyper-edited compilations of people doing random things. It thinks those are their tribe members, and it's saying, I have a ton of information about my surroundings, which I can get out of this device, especially with a high pace, like with short-form content, by the way. It doesn't understand that it's consuming random garbage. That applies to social media, YouTube, TV series, news, all of that. So as we illustrated, fast food, adult content, social media, TV shows, and all similar activities are examples of supernormal stimuli. They're engineered by massive industries that take something you primarily find rewarding and artificially amplify that aspect to make it supernormally stimulating. Essentially, not just progress, but hyper progress. And obviously, this hyper progress isn't actual progress at all. It was just engineered by industries to delude your brain into thinking so. Therefore, it's virtual hyper progress. Meta spends billions to make Facebook as addictive as possible, refining every tiny detail. Notification color, feed content selection, algorithm suggestions, you name it, just to exaggerate the virtual hyper progress the platform provides, mainly in the form of social approval and exposure to novelty. Deirdre Barrett, which is the author of the book that explains this phenomenon in detail in her book, Supernormal Stimuli, that's the name of the book itself. It's called Supernormal Stimuli. She says the exaggerated imitation can exert a stronger pull than the real thing. Our modern skulls house a Stone Age mind. An example she mentions is the oystercatcher bird, which research is presented with two eggs. The first is its own egg, and the second is a giant, brightly painted blaster egg. Even though the bird could not possibly sit on or hatch the giant egg, it would repeatedly abandon its own natural egg to struggle atop the massive fake one. As illustrated by this image, it would abandon its own egg and struggle atop the fake one. That's because it's hardwired with a simple rule. Bigger and more speckled equals healthier offspring. The fake egg provided a super version of that signal virtually. I'm telling you all of this because you need to know you're not too different from that oyster catcher. You can never make true progress as in studying, working, building a business, or whatever, as long as your brain has an option of such hyper progress. Your brain is literally saying, no, why should I do something like studying, which is minimally progressive, when I can do so much more progress in a shorter period of time? I can meet with tens of women in the form of passive consumption of adult content. I can access massive nutritious dense meals and foods in the form of readily available processed food. I can ingest so much information about my surroundings and tribe members in the form of social media or content. And you want me to leave all of that hyper progress on the table and go study? No way in hell I'm doing that. This illustrates the options given to your brain at any given time. Studying, or the work we usually conceive of as productive, is regarded by your brain as puny and insignificant compared to the very stimulating forms of virtual hyper progress, which are always available as options, right? So your brain completely disregards it. It is absolutely insane to say this, but it's real. Your brain thinks that these things are actually more progress and are better for you than anything else. It is downright insane. And to make matters worse, you can't reverse this consciously, no matter how hard you persuade your brain that fast food makes you fat and unhealthy, doom scrolling wastes your time and energy, etc. All of that is hardwired and you can't consciously undo it. These things are not merely distractions. Your mind thinks they're the goal of your existence. It actively seeks them out because to your brain, these things represent the core progress of life. While the actual progress, like studying or working or whatever, is what your brain perceives as a distraction. And there's no way to undo that. That is absolutely insane. I'll say that again. These things are distractions. Your mind thinks they're the goal of your existence. It seeks them out because it thinks they represent the core progress of your life, while the actual progress is perceived by your brain as the distraction. Absolutely insane. So what now? Are we doomed? Is there no way out of this loop since we can't consciously undo it? Thankfully, there is. There is a way to correct your brain's vision and get it to actually do the work without engaging with such artificial hyper progress and see only work as the true progress. And that would be choice architecture, a full-fledged system that controls the activities you have access to at any given time. Removing distractions once doesn't work. Trying out a site blocker or screen time app doesn't work. It's never that simple. I already told you that. These supernormal stimuli are engineered by experts, psychologists, and social engineers funded by billion-dollar industries. They know how to hack your brain and leech on it from within, so a superficial approach won't do anything. And that's why I call it choice architecture. It has to be deep, and systematic, you're building a comprehensive system for addressing the choices you naturally flow into from deep within. As I discussed previously, and we'll discuss in more details in a future video about discipline, eliminating the mere choices of hyperstimulating activities is an insane driver of discipline and progress towards one's goals. When it's not an option anymore, you don't have to convince your brain to do anything. When you eradicate the possibility of engaging with such artificial forms of hyper progress, your brain will simply say, well, since I can't make progress in my resourcefulness, in reproduction, in knowledge acquisition, or any of that, I guess I'll have to make progress through studying or working on that thing you've been procrastinating on or whatever. So you'll actually cut off these signals of virtual hyper progress so that all your mental energy will be directed towards what actually counts as progress now. As an example, world-class writer Victor Hugo had an exhilarating social life and drinking habits that distracted him from writing. So he used to lock himself in the office for 4 hours with nothing but a paper and pen, take off all his clothes, and give them to his butler, instructing him to not give them to him until he's done writing. Alex Ramosi recommends setting your smartphone color to grayscale to make the experience of scrolling less addictive. There are tons of examples of such practices out there. What I care about is the core concept, right? There won't be a tug of war between you and your mind anymore. You won't need to pressure it into resisting the majestic hyper progress in favor of the measly, puny little progress, which is what actually matters to you, right? It'll be second nature. It'll be your norm. Hard work will now be the main outlet of progress and therefore pleasure to your brain. Not only that, but disengaging with such activities will also reset your stimulation baseline, amplifying the pleasure you get from hard work, making it as addictive as what social media used to be compared to your old baseline. I hope that makes sense. So in the emotional relativity graph, if you can bring that baseline stimulation level down, then a less stimulating activity could be more stimulating compared to another activity that was more stimulating but with a higher baseline. I hope that makes sense. I know it's confusing, but what I'm trying to say is the gap between your baseline and the activity level will enlarge. It will increase in size. So that will make the process itself, as a net result, more stimulating than what social media used to be when you had an already raised baseline. I hope that gets my point through. And that's an example of how productivity engineering is a magical science. You'll love to see it. It is absolutely glamorous and absolutely exhilarating to practice and study. So back to the process of choice architecture. This is how you do it. First of all, you need a second brain. Notion, Obsidian, pen and paper, whatever. You need to monitor and keep track of the leeches in your environment. You need to research and look for tools and systems that help you eradicate these leeches from your life completely. AI helps you engineer custom blogs and make your job much easier now that we're in 2026. It also helps you find the perfect apps, blockers, plugins, whatever it is you need to compile within your system to achieve that. And on a side note, I have to say that I've tried balanced approaches in which I can only scroll Instagram for 15 minutes a day, use Facebook only 2 days per week. All have failed. Only radical approaches help me, which I eradicated something completely. Just saying. Third, you have to resist the itch and make a full system for redirecting that itch or boredom or stress that leads you to start scrolling, reach for the remote to turn on Netflix, open YouTube in a new tab before even thinking about it, and so on. Fourth, you have to rinse and repeat. It's called choice architecture and not removing distractions for a reason. It's a long-term process of reiteration and improvement. You have to be ruthlessly perseverant and consistent with it. Keep logging how your mind drags you away from your work, what happens throughout, and implement what you can to prevent that. Study the patterns, put the blocks at the most critical times or stations of your autonomous habits, like reaching to your phone when bored without even being conscious about it, and systematize resisting that itch. Saying something like, I'll just read instead of doom scrolling is a recipe for disaster. Like, you need to be more analytical and more realistic about the process. Again, systematic and deep. You gotta ask yourself, how accessible is reading? Do you even like reading? Can you sustainably do it? You need to experiment, reiterate, log, and refine until that subsystem is highly effective. And then you proceed to the other subsystems until the whole system is refined. Finally, you need to be serious about the process, theoretically and practically, as if you're doing your master's thesis on it, because it is only with such a ruthlessly serious stance that you'll be able to fight multi-billion-dollar industries fighting for your attention by their virtual hyper-progress. That turns you from the goal-achieving machine God bless you to be into a money-making machine for those industries with your time and attention. Which do you want to be? The choice is entirely yours. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this guide, you might as well like this one or this one. I don't know where I'll put it. If you have any questions or inquiries, leave them in the comments down below. I answer all questions, and I'll see you in my next masterclass. Peace out. Where the fuck?